Saudi Arabia just made a gigantic announcement. And folks, let me make myself clear. That announcement is not what meets the eye. There's something much more consequential, and you might be shocked when you find out what it is. All right, folks, let's get into this one. I absolutely am enthralled with stories that come out of Saudi Arabia. I don't know why. I just enjoy watching so much of what comes out of the royal family of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because there are so many intricate pieces to what I believe to be a very complex puzzle. And when you start looking at the Arabian Peninsula and you begin to examine all of the things that are happening at the same time, you look at its relationship to the north with Israel, you begin to see what's happening in the Persian Gulf. You look at how it's beginning to influence so much of the things that are happening in Iraq, yes, even Iran, dare I say, the influence that it has on little tiny countries like Kuwait, some of the things that's happening right now with Saudi Arabia and so many of the other Sunni nations, and dare I say, even a few Shiite nations. How about the fact that if you go across the pond that known as the Red Sea and you get to the other side on the eastern portion of the African continent, Saudi Arabia has a tremendous influence over there. And quite frankly, folks, its influence in the Islamic world is, of course, number one. And we know that that's the presence of Mecca and all of the things that are going on there. And we've talked a lot about Mecca and what that's really all about. And we've done a lot of work with Dr. Jay Smith, who has shared with us deeply rooted insight as into the farce that exists around all of that, especially with the Quran and Muhammad and all of that stuff. But like I said before, that's all enthralling to me. But when I look at stories like this, I am blown away because, look, I don't know if other people can see it. I mean, I know other people can see it, but I just wonder if there are people in the mainstream that are looking at this the way that I'm looking at it. I hope there are, because these signals can't be more clear. And I think that if you're really close to the geopolitics of what's happening in Saudi Arabia and all over the Middle East, this is an easy signal. This is going to be one that you're not going to have a hard time looking at. Now, the typical American might look at a headline like this and go, so what? Big deal. Saudi Arabia wants to make more money. What in the world? But if you really look closely and you begin to understand what's going on, I'm going to tell you this right now. This is Saudi Arabia signaling Israel. And it's signaling Israel in a very unique and very, dare I say, courageous way in some respects, and in many other ways, a very dangerous way. But none of this should surprise you, because if you study Bible prophecy, you will know that Saudi Arabia will be an ally towards Israel. Now, the funny thing about Saudi Arabia is they will not respond militaristically speaking. And of course, we kind of know that that tends to be the character of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia does not act offensively. They typically don't even want to involve themselves in arenas that would require them to behave offensively. They typically are a defensive type country. And in many respects, they won't even get their hands involved in the defense of other nations unless it absolutely requires the fact that they do that in order to cover or protect their own national interests. And I think that that's admirable. But the one thing that is more remarkable to me and more uniquely puzzling in many ways is how Saudi Arabia is signaling Israel in a way that is so undeniable that it's actually shocking, while at the same time seems to be toting some line amongst the many Arab nations that respect Saudi Arabia and follow the lead of Saudi Arabia. As a matter of fact, the normalization agreements that took place between many of these countries in the Gulf and around the Arabian Peninsula and Israel took place because of the blessing that the royal family of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia gave them. And so all of this stuff is shocking in one respect, but in another respect, it should not be surprising, because we know when the attacks in Ezekiel 38 take place, we know that there will be nations that will object, Saudi Arabia, of course, being the most significant of those nations. And in their objection, that's all they will do. They will object. They won't involve themselves militaristically speaking, or if they do, it will be so nominal that it will have no effect, because we know that there will be nobody that will be able to stop this conglomeration of nations that attacks Israel other than God himself. We know that per Ezekiel 39. And so it's a very interesting study when you begin to look at all of the intricacies that need to happen in order to facilitate the very complex set of geopolitics that will usher in the circumstances of Ezekiel 38 and 39. But even more than that, it becomes more complicated when you begin to see Jews from all over the world, yes, dare I say, in unbelief, coming into the nation of Israel. We are seeing record numbers of Jews that are going back to Israel, which is in essence the beginning of the fulfillment of Ezekiel 37, which, by the way, happens to be part of the set of complexities that need to all gel together in order for the scenario to come to pass as we predict it coming to pass based on what we read about in the scriptures. So all of this should not be a surprise when we read headlines like the one I'm about to read. And folks, please don't take the headline for face value. Yes, we take it for face value because that is exactly what they're doing. When Riyadh says that they're monetizing all minerals, make no mistake, they're doing it, especially when it comes to minerals like uranium. I get that. But the fact that they're mentioning uranium and they're specifically pointing out uranium in and of itself means they are signaling Israel. That's exactly what's going on. And I'll explain it in just a second because it might not be so obvious to some of you, but it is darn obvious to me. And hopefully it's going to be obvious to people like Bibi. It's going to be obvious to the security minister, otherwise known as our defense minister. He's the equivalent of that, the security minister, Israel Katz, who used to be the foreign minister. He was a great foreign minister. He's a great security minister now. I hope that they see through this because there's a small window of time that Israel has to do what they need to do to destroy Iran's nuclear capacity. And I'm telling you this right now, this will be a move that if Israel makes will be fully supported by Donald Trump because Donald Trump does not want to see more war. He wants to be known as the president that stopped all of the wars. And I think that if there's anybody that can do it, it's him simply because of the fact that there's a lot of people all over the world that believe Donald Trump when Donald Trump says there will be hell to pay. So, that was a mouthful, and an earful for that matter. So let's get into the article because this will begin to make some serious sense when we go through it. It is very interesting. The title of the article is Riyadh Set to Monetize All Minerals, Including Uranium, Yellow Cake. Okay? Folks, this one is crazy when you hear what the Saudi energy minister says concerning all of this. And by the way, he is the perfect member of the family to bring this up for a lot of reasons. Actually, I don't even have the time to get into the history of Abdul Aziz and the story of where he is involved in all of this. But by the way, very eloquent man, very clear in his representations, and very, very, very understanding of how everything connects politically, especially as it relates to the energy issue. By the way, as the energy minister, Abdul Aziz is instrumental in what happens with OPEC and actually what happens with BRICS and other organizations that tend to lean into or feed into those two. So he has a lot to do with a lot of what's going on. And I think that this is really, really critical for us to be able to understand and recognize what it all means. So let's look at this. This is wild. By the way, this is coming straight out of Dubai when he's saying this. So look what it says. It says Saudi Arabia plans to monetize all minerals, including by selling uranium, Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdul Aziz bin Salman said on Monday. And this is his quote, "We will enrich it and we will sell it and we will do a yellow cake." Prince Abdul Aziz told the conference in Dahran, referring to a powdered concentrate of mineral used to prepare uranium fuel for nuclear reactors. It requires safe handling, although it poses few radiation risks. By the way, folks, when you begin to have people talking about making this preparation, it means that they are very serious, okay? They mean business by this. And Saudi Arabia has been looking for ways to signal the rest of the world that they mean business over this because of so much of the nonsense that's been happening with the rhetoric of the leaders of Iran and some of the countries sympathetic towards Iran's causes. And when Iran says we're going to find nuclear weapons and destroy our enemies, you probably ought to believe them when they say that. And when they say that nuclear weapons are not off the table, especially when it's coming out of the mouth of a president who claims to be a little bit more moderate than the former president, Raisi, who was known as the Butcher of Tehran. Folks, this means something serious. And so Saudi Arabia is taking it seriously. Israel is undoubtedly taking it seriously. And it's getting to the point where Saudi Arabia is recognizing that Iran is being allowed to continue in somewhat of an unmitigated fashion to regroup from the destruction that it just experienced. And Saudi Arabia, just like Israel, recognizes that they cannot allow the snake to recover. And that's a really, really critical point of all of this, which is why I believe Saudi Arabia is making the announcement that they're making. And by the way, after this paragraph, I will get into just how serious Saudi Arabia is when you see a portion of an interview between Brett Baier and MBS, who speaks very specifically about Iran and the nuclear problem. And I think that this is something that will serve as very eye-opening if you stop to think through how serious of an issue this is. Here's the paragraph. It says this: Saudi Arabia has a nascent nuclear program that it wants to expand to eventually include uranium enrichment, a sensitive area given its role in nuclear weapons. Riyadh has said it wants to use nuclear power to diversify its energy mix. Now, let me sort of take that a step further, because as I read this next paragraph, some of this is going to begin to make some more sense at somewhat of an alarming pace. Look at what it says here. It says, it is unclear where Saudi nuclear ambitions will end, since Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said in 2018 that the kingdom could develop nuclear weapons if regional rival Iran did. By the way, let me take it a step further. He may have initially said that in 2018, but he said it again, I believe in 2023, when he was interviewed by Brett Baier. And listen to what he says here, because this is eye-opening. Again, I went over this. And by the way, you can click right here. I think I'll put the link right there if you want to see the interview with Brett Baier and Ben Salman and my comments on it. It's actually a very, very good interview and definitely worth watching. But this is the portion of that interview where he says something strikingly important, okay? So let's take a listen to this. By the way, that interview was filled with striking importance all throughout, but this one was a really big doozy. Let's take a listen to what he says here.
Are you concerned, though, Iran gets a nuclear weapon, about them getting a nuclear weapon?
Well, we are concerned of any country getting a nuclear weapon. That's a bad move. And you don't need to get a nuclear weapon because you cannot use it. Even if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, any country use a nuclear weapon, that means they are having a war with the rest of the world. The world cannot see another Hiroshima. If the world see 100,000 people dead, that means you are in a war with the rest of the world. So it's a useless effort to reach a nuclear weapon, because you cannot use it. If you use it, you got to have a big fight with the rest of the world.
If they get one, will you?
Listen to this. If they get one, will you? Listen to what he says. And he's not hesitating, folks. Listen to this. This is 2023, not 2018. Listen to this.
We have to get one.
You hear that, folks? If they get one, we have to get one. Okay? So they're serious about the idea of pursuing nuclear weapons. Now, I personally think that Saudi Arabia's not so keen on wanting to actually start the production of nuclear weapons because of the implications that that can bring with some of the security considerations and how they have to up their game with respect to defense and so on and so forth. It is a huge hassle. But they are willing to enrich uranium in a way that will allow them to build nuclear weapons if they have to. I don't think they want to. I actually think that what they want to do is they want to signal another country to destroy the nuclear capacity of their enemy, Iran. Now, I know they've shaken hands and they're supposedly making peace. They're not. They don't trust one another, and for good reason. Saudi Arabia should never trust Iran. Give me a break. Iran hates Saudi Arabia if you really want to push it. But look what it goes on to say here in the article. Fellow Gulf state, the United Arab Emirates, has the Arab world's first multi-unit operating nuclear energy plant. The UAE has committed not to enrich uranium itself and not to reprocess spent fuel. The kingdom said last year it planned to scrap light touch oversight of its nuclear facilities by the UN atomic watchdog and switch to regular safeguards by the end of 2024. Okay, so listen to this last paragraph, because this is important, right? Riyadh has yet to fire up its first nuclear reactor, which allows its program to still be monitored under the Small Quantities Protocol, an agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency that exempts less advanced states from many reporting obligations and inspections, which, by the way, that's a very strategic decision that Saudi Arabia is making for a very specific purpose. Okay, so let me tell you my take on this, folks. First of all, knowing what the Bible says about Saudi Arabia and Israel, knowing Saudi Arabia's stand with respect to its desire to normalize with Israel and its cooperation that we have seen it give to Israel over the last several years, including defending Israel against Iran's missile attacks towards it. Knowing Saudi Arabia's signal towards wanting to see benefit through multiple nations that surround that area through the reprocessing of a trade route, knowing Saudi Arabia's commitment to Egypt to basically, I'm not going to say pay them off, but to subsidize the loss in income that they're going to get by bypassing trade as it's normally routed through the Red Sea and the use of the Suez Canal, based on a mutual agreement that is about to be obtained between Saudi Arabia and the United States when Trump comes into office to also assist in the maintenance of the Suez Canal in exchange for some militaristic benefits, military benefits, knowing and understanding the benefit that could come to the southern portion of the Arabian Peninsula by the stabilization of that region, by the mutual agreements to remove some of the terrorist organizations that exist that are sympathetic towards the cause of Iran, knowing and understanding what's going on in the Persian Gulf, and recognizing the pathways that Saudi Arabia is helping to make, specifically in southern Iran, through what they're calling the building of Babylon or the new Babylon, the erection of the new Babylon, understanding the agreements they're coming to with Kuwait, recognizing some of the restatements of trade routes that will start as far away as India and even Pakistan, understanding what they plan to do as you go further east, bringing in more and more agreements, especially as you start getting into areas that will eventually touch and affect Russia. I can tell you this right now. I think what Saudi Arabia is doing by saying what they're saying, I think the announcement that Abdulaziz is making is a signal to Israel saying, you better destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. That's what I believe the signal is. And I think that they are signaling that knowing full well that the Trump administration is going to support it, because I think they've probably already received personal guarantees from the incoming President Trump. I am willing to bet, and I could be totally wrong about this. Believe me, I could be wrong, but I'm willing to bet that we are going to find out over the next few months, maybe within the next year, that Israel has either covertly or very publicly gone out of their way to destroy an overwhelming majority of these nuclear facilities in Iran. And I would not be surprised if within the next few weeks, either just before the inauguration or immediately after the inauguration, we begin to see a concerted effort by Israel to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. I believe that Saudi Arabia will come right out with a conglomerate of nations supporting it, specifically Sunni nations, that will agree with the function of normalization between Israel, and I believe we will see the beginning of a temporary peace that causes Israel to find a level of security that they've probably never seen before. I also believe that that will probably be the type of security that will eventually play into Ezekiel 38. How long will that take? Will that be a few years? Will it be 10 years? Will it be 20 years? Will it be a few months? I don't know. A few months, probably not. But what I can tell you is that this is a strong and powerful signal coming out of Saudi Arabia. And I bet you Israel is going to pick up on it and act on it. Now, why is that important? It's important because the Bible already told us that we would find conditions that look like this. Now, if all hell breaks loose in the Mideast and things go crazy, well, then maybe it wasn't the way that I assumed it would happen. God always blows my mind with how he does things. I make guesses all the time, and I get those guesses wrong. But the one thing that I do know is I know the end game. And so I can always maintain accuracy and consistency by reminding you of what God says is going to happen at the end, and we can look to connect the dots as we approach what we're approaching in the future. But folks, 2025 is going to be a doozy, and I cannot wait to see what's going to happen in the Middle East as a result of all of this. Now, one thing's for sure, I'm here, I'm with you, I'm going to be looking out at all of this stuff, and we are going to watch some crazy things happening as we look to the coming of the Lord for his church. Again, Christ could come at any moment. I've been saying that for 30 some odd years. And if I say it for another 30 some odd years, I can tell you this right now. Life is more fulfilling when you recognize the truth. And the truth is Christ will come at any moment. I don't think it'll be another 30 years. Maybe it will. I don't know. But I can tell you this. I can tell you that we have a lot to look forward to, because the life that we live on this earth is a wonderful one. But the one that we have coming is far better than anything we could possibly imagine. So let's look to him. There's hope. We can find that hope. And if you don't have it, it's a simple prayer. You say, Christ Jesus, come into my life. I accept your free gift of salvation. I want your forgiveness. It's that simple. You don't do anything for it. And then your reasonable service is to do what? Is to live sacrificially for the Lord. That's what Romans tells us. There's a lot of hope for the future, folks. Let's live towards it. Why? Because God is good, and he'll always be good. He's faithful. To God be the glory, great things he has done, and greater things he's going to do.